Yes. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Talk Math with your friends. You are welcome to engage in the chat. It's up to our guests whether or not we'd like sort of interactive out loud things, but I'm going to keep my camera on so that Marian doesn't feel like she's talking to the void, and others are welcome and encouraged to do so. I hope you all know Marian's work, but if you don't, one thing she says about herself on her website is, by specializing in elementary education, mathematics, and culturally responsive teaching, she inspires educators and educational organizations to rethink pedagogy, to honor student and educator brilliance and identity. And I wanted to invite Marian to this, to our colloquium, because I am inspired by sort of like a dual way she approaches things. On the one hand, she is like very fierce and pointed, and we're not gonna slip away from what the core issue is. We're not gonna talk about the nice things and only those and let the other things keep continuing on without critiquing, but also in a way that is so inclusive, so welcoming, and so friendly and gentle and caring. So I just am inspired by how she does both of those. And at the same time, and as an example, she became very well known outside of math education Twitter about a year and a half ago, tweeting on, I believe, January 6th of last year. So educators, what are you teaching tomorrow? Will it enable your students to think critically, or will it make them resent you for years from now when they learn of the truth you didn't tell? And I think that's a great example to sort of like challenge us to do the work that needs doing at these critical times, but sort of like a call to action that brings people into that work. So please join me in welcoming one of the luminaries of math Twitter and math education world, Marian Dingle, to Talk Math with your friends.
Wow, now that's an introduction. Thank you so much, Brian, and everyone for having me. It's still wild when I think about how I even got here. But today is just going to be a conversation among friends, correct?
Yeah.
So I will share and we can get started. Oops. Okay, you would think after all of these months, that would be a little smoother. Okay, so we are talking about opening the mathematical gates. I usually begin with acknowledgements. I acknowledge that I am an educator still, even though I am no longer in the classroom, that I am safe, healthy, recently boosted. I live in lands that some call Atlanta, that are the unceded lands of the Cherokee. I acknowledge that there are many, many of us who have undergone loss, illness of self, of loved ones, financial crises, different happenings with friendships, maybe the loss of friendships or the beginnings of new ones. Let's just take a moment to acknowledge everything that has happened in the last nearly 2 years. Thank you for that. I also acknowledge that I hail from descendants of the enslaved, that I come from strong stock, that I hail from survivors. We all are survivors, whether we realize it or not. So I invite you to take a deep breath. No matter what you've had to endure today, or who you have had to endure, that we are now here together, and hopefully we can enjoy each other and talk about math and what's math adjacent. I also acknowledge that what I do is personal to me. I have 2 adult children pictured here. On the left was my daughter, not long after the pandemic. She was newly relocated, starting a brand new life in a new city. And this was her attempt, I believe, in helping us realize that she was okay and that she could take care of herself. This is her and her first trip grocery shopping after lockdown was announced. On the right, during the pandemic, my son was still in college as a college athlete. We endured together what football means as a college athlete in a pandemic, what school means and what's important. So I get it. We all have these shared experiences. So for today, I invite you to set your own agreements and intentions. We'll do that together. I'll give you some thoughts of things that I've been thinking about, things that I think are important. At the end, hopefully we'll have some time for us to just have a discussion. No slides, just faces, hopefully, if you're comfortable sharing them. So as far as agreements, this is what I propose. I don't do norms. I think that in and of itself can be harmful. I am asking that you engage as you can, whatever that means, camera on, camera off. If you need to get up, take a break, please do that. What I talk about tends to be uncomfortable. I ask you to lean into that, to challenge yourself, to be honest about where you are and where you want to be. I am not perfect. I have never professed to be. There are many, many things during the pandemic, especially, that I've learned about myself. And all of those things happened after I got to a place of honesty. So if that is okay with everyone, I will move on. My why. I did not start off wanting to be an educator at all. In fact, my mother was an educator. My mother always professed that I would be a college graduate, and in the same sentence said that I would not be supported financially if I went to school and majored in education. So being a teacher was never really on my radar. I just happened into it after having tried a lot of other things. And so in that career of being a classroom educator that I was a part of for over 20 years, I was in different contexts. I was in public school, I was in private school, I was in Georgia, I was in Maryland. I had a clientele with a very high socioeconomic status. I've had exactly the opposite. I've been in situations where most of the racial demographic was pretty homogeneous. I've been in diverse situations as well. And no matter where I have been, I can't count how many different schools that is, but no matter where I found myself, the students who look like me always performed at the bottom. And that has always, always bothered me. I did not grow up that way. I grew up feeling that I could do anything. As I suspect this former student is growing up. It is the problem of my lifetime. It is my problem of practice. That's why I'm here. So for you, I remember when I bought this t-shirt, I think for all of us, no matter how many times we may have the opportunity to speak with a group or be in front of a classroom, that there's always this voice in the back of your head that wonders if you're really supposed to be here. So I tend to include that shirt just as a check for me that imposter syndrome is a lie. So for you, I'd like for you to consider why you are here, why you chose to be here on this screen at this moment. What do you hope to gain from being here? I believe in being very intentional. Specifically, what action do you commit to as a result of this session? Of course, you can't answer that now. These are just the intentions that we're setting. That's what I want you to keep thinking about as we talk. Okay, the gates of math. Bob Moses, in his infinite wisdom, always described mathematics, specifically algebra, as this gatekeeper. His words, math instruction weeds out people, and you wind up with what amounts to a priesthood, masters of the arcane math through what appears to be some God-given talent or magic. Algebra is the gatekeeper for citizenship. Most of us have heard this before. It was during this period where Bob actually decided to teach his own child algebra and decided to do that in her classroom. He would come to class and teach her and a couple of other students while they were in 8th grade. And that began, as you know, this whole wave of the whole country wanting to have every student complete algebra by 8th grade. We'll revisit that in about 10 slides. So as Brian alluded, I tend to tweet out my feelings. I tweet out happiness. I tweet out when I am sad, and I tweet when I am frustrated. So this thread was from one of those frustrating moments. I just got tired of, you go into any bookstore and there's this huge section on leadership. How can you be an effective leader? How do you communicate as a good leader? All of these workshops that we attend, people pay thousands of dollars to be in a room with a great leader. When we, in my opinion, don't really even know what leadership is. Being surrounded by these leadership opportunities, there is just no shortage of them. If we really wanted to aspire to leadership, seems to me we would just do it. Leading is selfish. It propels action simply because it must be done. You can't tell me there aren't countless opportunities to lead in this moment. I believe this was a couple of months old, but it still stands. Leadership also sees through greed and clout seeking. Leaders lead. Leadership is in all of us. So I'm asking you to hold that thought and position it in the same place that you have heard of all of these people telling you what leadership is. Leadership is not positional. What we are supposed to be doing is asking, how are the children? And if we really wanted to know how the children are, we would also ask, how are the adults? So what's math leadership? And who exactly are we leading? Are these children who look like they're having the time of their lives because their magnetiles tower just exploded? Are they not leaders because they're having too much fun? Whose position does the expert? When you look in a room in a split second and notice two students working, do you instantly think that one is the expert and one is not? And finally, who gets invited to lead in math? There's this cycle that some of us who are marginalized, especially racially marginalized, know a little bit about. There are some children that have to prove that they're good at math. And there are some children that have to prove that they belong in math. But those children grow up. Some adults have to prove that they're good at math. Some adults have to prove that they belong in math. Is your workplace, is your organization all that different? Those of us that say as adults that we don't feel as though we belong, that there's no space made for us, this is not a new feeling. We feel this in our adult professional lives, but we also felt that in the classroom. And that cycle is what I think needs to be broken. When we talk about leadership, this is what I think of as leadership. I was talking to Brian before the session about former administrators, and this is one administrator who I still keep in touch with, even though I haven't worked in her building for over a decade. She's now retired. But one thing that always struck me was that when we were ever out in the world, outside of our building, she would always introduce me as her colleague, never her subordinate, not one of her teachers, as her colleague. I have never, ever forgotten that. It's really about not just the work that you do, but who are you bringing with you? And even now, we still keep in touch, hence this text. I was so moved by a text exchange that we'd had. I was telling her about my life and updating her on things. And she sent me this text that even now that we probably haven't seen each other in 15 years, that she can still make me feel as though I can do anything. That's leadership. That's what we're supposed to be transferring to our students. I show this slide usually as, the moment where the world changed and the pandemic happened. But honestly, for many people, this is just everyday life. There's always something. There's always another shoe that drops. There's always something else that we are asked to do. Another thread. This was the thread where I announced that I walked away from teaching. Now, up to that point, teaching had been my life's calling, in my opinion. It was how I defined myself. It was a lifestyle. There were few things that I could ever think of that would shift me in a different situation. But you know what? Never say never, right? I just could not, for the life of me, spend another day being complicit in a system that I could no longer believe in. And one thing that I advocate for now fervently is to make sure that whatever it is that you're doing, that you can do it with integrity, and that is true for yourself. I acknowledge that this was a privilege I had to walk away from teaching, and not everyone has that privilege, but if you can, you owe it to yourself. Which led me to ask, who am I now? So let's go back to Bob. So Bob had this great if-then proposition. around algebra. The premise is that if we can teach algebra in the middle school years, then we should do it. Sounds logical, right? But here was the obstacle. You could ask a couple of questions. You could ask, do you think your child should do algebra? Most parents would say, yes, absolutely. Give my child that opportunity. But when you ask people if you think every child should do algebra, then there's the rub, right? We get into, well, maybe it's not for everyone. It's for my kid, but not for everyone. That stratification of society. So when it is that you do this work of fighting against something, fighting against the status quo, fighting against an oppressive schooling system, yes, you should expect resistance. I have faced that. Many, many people before me have. Many people are still doing it now. People will laugh at you. They will belittle you. They will disparage you. And definitely, they will gaslight you into thinking that you're making way too big of a deal of things that, of course, I didn't say that racist comment. Of course, I would never. People will tell us that we're bad, that we're the ones causing harm, and that we can't be trusted. Part of how you know that you're on the right track is if you get this resistance in the first place. I love, there was a video, I believe it was one of those Now This videos. And there was a moment in this video where she was asked, where do you get the courage? At the time, she was actively speaking out against everything. She was all over the news. She was being disparaged everywhere. And what she says is, I'm always taken aback by that question because it doesn't feel like courage to me. I'm scared all the time too. But courage is a funny thing because, at least in my experience, courage is just something you see when you play the tape back. I thought that was brilliant. I've never forgotten that. In the moment, it will never feel like a big thing. It will be your friends who remind you of a tweet you made or a stance that you've taken. You will see the bounty of what you have put out in the world at some point later. And in the end, isn't that the lifestyle of a teacher anyway? Especially an elementary teacher, we plant seeds, but we never really know if they'll bear fruit. Sometimes we find out how the story ends, but most of the time not. This brings me to this series on Netflix called Dance Dreams, Hot Chocolate Nutcracker. So this is Debbie Allen, who is famous choreographer, dancer, actress, director. She's done it all. She also owns and operates Dada, the Debbie Allen Dance Academy, which is shown in this documentary. This is Kylie Jefferson, who is shown in the documentary. I believe this is one of her Hot Chocolate Nutcracker performances. And in her words, in Kylie Jefferson's words, she says, because I came from Dada, Debbie Allen Dance Academy, I didn't realize how big of a deal that was. The world is so different from Dada. Because where I come from, we all do it, and we were all good. She was talking about having to leave Dada and go out into the world and compete for other roles, compete for spots in other dance companies, and being told that she did not belong, that she didn't fit the mold of a ballerina. The same thing that Debbie Allen's daughter was told, which is why Debbie Allen created her dance academy in the first place, so that other potential ballerinas could have a shot. And so as I'm watching this documentary, which has nothing to do with mathematics, all I can think about is how this has everything to be with mathematics. Because as Kylie is speaking and saying those words, this is what I'm hearing. Because I came from math excellence, I didn't realize how big of a deal that was. The world is so different from this place where Black brilliance is seen. Because where I come from, we all do math and we were all good. I can say that. Other math students can say that. Educators, mathematicians who look like me. Further, she says, the craft that chose me was not created in my image. And that was a really hard realization. But at the same time, this craft chose me, so I have no choice but to do it and to give it my all. And for me, the math that chose me was not created in my image. And that was a really hard realization. But at the same time, this math chose me, so I have no choice but to do it and to give it my all. So let's go back to one of my tweets where I said leadership is in all of us. Now, there are many, many algorithms for leadership, the 5 steps of this and the 10 steps to that. One of them I came across was that leadership is in 3 components: to agitate, to innovate, to orchestrate. But honestly, leadership is just being a good human, isn't it? Because when we're not good humans, it's a question of life or death. Same with mathematics. I advance that the marginalized students you're planning for today are the marginalized colleagues that survived K-12 yesterday. I am one of them. My children are in that group. And I can tell you, there aren't too many days that go by where I don't apologize to my own children for the world that they have inherited. I believe that it is not enough to do one of these 2 things. Yes, we need to work on our biases. I know I do. There are a lot of things I still need to learn. I'm constantly reading and talking to people and trying to diversify my friend groups and all of those things, reading history and figuring out where I am positioned in this world and how I can affect that change. And also, I am part of systems and structures. Yes, I left teaching, but I am still swimming in this place that we all are, that we all know has systemic oppression of racialized people, has white supremacy everywhere. We all know this. Some of us are too afraid to say it out loud. Some of us benefit from it, and it's just not a big deal. Real change won't happen until all of us commit to doing both of these things simultaneously. Are you questioning your leadership in your organization, in your company, in your institution? Because if you're not, then what are you doing? Peanuts. There's no racism here, right? Until you consider this picture. Now, it never really hit me until I saw this picture, but I did have to think about it. Where are the Black people in the Peanuts? And why is he sitting alone by himself in a different chair. As an elementary educator who also taught literacy, it wasn't until these reports came out that I really started thinking about representation. If you look at this, and this, I don't think that there's been a more recent study than 2018, but if you look at diversity in children's books and who the main characters are, you notice that there are more main characters that are animals or trucks or inanimate objects than there are in all the non-white racial identities combined. What do you think that does to our children, where they grow up in this world that is normal? But that's not normal. It's not normal to not be able to look in a mirror. We know that Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop talks about mirrors and windows. But when some of our children look in mirrors far more often than others, we know that this is a problem. What are we doing about that? Your work with racialized students should cause your relationships with racialized colleagues to deepen. I hear from people all the time. Sometimes they get defensive, where they say how proud they are that they work in a diverse school, or that they work among a diverse staff. Well, if you're really doing that work with children, it would show up in your life with adults. You would have deeper relationships with adults. You just would. So maybe this is a chance to reflect on, what does your friend group look like? I know I've had to do that myself. There was a point where I realized, after calling white people out a lot, that I realized that my own friend group wasn't diverse. And I had to do something about that. I could not continue to practice what I didn't preach. All I'm suggesting is that we all start to do these things. Humanity is in all of us. Some questions for you. How will you know if you're trusted? Would you know if you'd caused racial harm? Would your colleague even tell you? Would your colleague apologize for racial harm they caused you? What are we doing in our day-to-day interactions with our colleagues? Because we are each other's harvest and each other's business. We are each other's magnitude and bond. That's what I believe. So when it comes to talking about educating children, I admit my bias. I believe that whoever is closest to the work is the expert. Now, that's probably because I don't have a doctorate. Moses didn't have a doctorate either, but just saying. So I don't have that bias toward the academy. I believe that the children and the caregivers are the ones who are experts in education. Then come the classroom educators, the ones that are actually in the classrooms every day. After that, then you've got your coaches, your administrators, and then after that, the teacher educators. I know that list is upside down for a lot of people, but just think about it. Who really knows what's going on and how best to teach the child? Because it's not just about the algorithm that we're teaching. It's not just about the miracle of the magic of mathematics. It's who we are teaching the miracle to. How do we maximize that impact? Most people would start here. You start in the classroom, and then, okay, maybe you can be a school administrator, then a district administrator, then maybe you could have a position in the state, the nation, and then the globe. But maybe it's the opposite. Maybe the people that have the maximum impact are actually in the classroom, teaching children. Something to think about. I am such a fan of Rochelle Gutierrez, as many of us are. Loved her creative insubordination paper. I have used all of these methods. And what I am thinking now is, because her paper is so popular and everyone knows it so well, that people see these strategies, they see them a mile away, they see them coming. We've all had to answer this question, not just in our jobs, but in opportunities that come our way, in organizations that we're in. What is that point where you say enough is enough and we can't do that anymore? That's why this is called the Great Resignation. Sometimes that lesson is to teach when to walk away. I'm so tired of waiting, aren't you, for the world to become good and beautiful and kind. Let us take a knife and cut the world in two and see what worms are eating at the rind. So I'm taking my cue from Angela Davis these days. Sometimes I'm gentle, sometimes not so gentle, but I am here partially because I feel I have not done my job in making the world a suitable place for my children, but perhaps I can make it a suitable place for my future grandchildren and all of the children of the world. I have to do my part. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing. We have a good bit of time to kind of talk through things. Brian, I believe I gave you a couple of questions that might get us started. Can everyone see those questions? Okay, maybe not. Let me see if I can go to them.
I have put them in the chat as a JPEG. Would you like the text put in the chat?
Yes, please. Just so
Okay.
it's easy and accessible. I appreciate that. So I don't know. So I first question, I guess, is any general reaction? Seem plausible to you? Anyone want to say anything? I haven't been keeping up with the chat box. Let's see. And please feel free to unmute and just speak freely. Asmita, I see.
Oops.
Beautiful.
Okay, come.
So what about leadership? How would you define it? How does it intersect with math specifically? Would you characterize yourself as a leader? Who are the leaders that resonate with you these days? In math, in academia, in anything?
Math Twitter.
Well, that's loaded.
Only some of us.
I think the combination of the AOC and Angela Davis quotes sort of build my definition of leadership. So like changing the things you can't accept, right? And I agree with AOC that in many ways it doesn't feel like a choice or courage. It's like I can't accept that thing, I have to act. And but that's sort of like choosing to change the flow rather than accept the flow as it is maybe my personal. Yeah, Sandra.
I was struck by the idea that there's a difference. You mentioned all the books we see in the bookstore, and I think those are often about the status of leadership. And I think one of the messages I heard you say was we don't need to wait to have the status of a leader to take on the identity of a leader, and that we can start behaving like a leader, whether or not we have positional power. And I think I hear a lot of things. I work a lot on sort of education reform issues, and I hear people saying, well, someone ought to do X, and someone is someone who's ahead of them and more powerful than them and higher in the food chain. And I think I want to always flip that question. What can we do? What can you do now from where you stand now? And yes, maybe there are other things that someone else can do better from their position, but what can you do instead of just waiting until you have some imagined status? Take on the identity of leadership now.
Yeah, thanks, Sandra. I think I am very frustrated with people who do have that, that positional role, who aren't using it. They're just, keeping the same cogs going. That's not leadership to me. So it's almost a misnomer on who are the real leaders. Like is a leader someone that has the gavel, that says, I second this motion at the right times, or is a leader someone who is actually trying to improve things for all of us, for children?
Reminds me of, we were lucky enough to have Dolores Huerta come to campus because she was receiving an honorary doctorate. And she talked about sort of this very thing about sort of the leaders everywhere kind of idea, and a really astute students. And how do you spot the leaders if like they could be anyone? And she said, because they show up every day and they do the work, which I just thought was like an amazing glimpse into some long-lived insight. It just made a dent. And I think you're right, because that also speaks a lot to this agency thing. No matter where you are, you always see somebody as higher that has the power. And so you have this learned helplessness, lack of agency, and that you carry with you up the ladder. There's always some fish bigger, some scale bigger.
Right, that will always be true. Absolutely. Esmita, would you like to say those brilliant words?
Sure. They're just talking about Marissa, loving talking about, I haven't been on Twitter that much lately, but I really admire Marissa a great deal because I know she is not like, we're at similar stages of our academic careers, I think, and I just watch her. I'm like, wow, I'm not not up to snuff with Marissa right now. But yeah, I guess I think about what kind of power I do have, because I'm in a position where like I finished my PhD a year and a half ago. I am precariously employed right now. Like I have what I call a pity postdoc because I couldn't get an academic job this year. So I think like I don't have very much power in some ways, but like I do have power in the classroom. And I do think of when it was talking about like embodying both leadership and thinking about that, I was thinking that like I have the power to try and make my students feel welcome in mathematics. Is one of the things that I take very seriously, particularly because I teach non-majors majority of the time. So yeah, just thinking of like, what power do I have right now? I've actually found, this is like getting away from math, but I've been finding a really helpful practice during the pandemic where so many things have been out of control to really think about what is in my control right now and what isn't, as a way to kind of curb things like anxiety and depression. But I think it applies to the power in the same way. Like I don't have power over choosing what's in my curriculum, but I do have power over how I deliver that, that information to students. I have power over the compassion that I give them as they're going through university in a turbulent time. So yeah, looking at what power you do have in a situation rather than just defaulting to thinking no power.
Absolutely. I love that. I love that. Okay, so now you're making me miss teaching in a classroom. I do tutor, but it's not the same. Anyone else?
It reminds me, Marian, of the t-shirt, the yellow shirt that you showed us at the start that says that I belong in this room. I think we need that same t-shirt that says like, I am a leader here in this space. And then we can all figure out what that means, because as Anita pointed out, can't all be the same leader in the same space in the same way, but we can all be a leader in our own spaces and in our own ways, and figure out how to do that. Like, what are the things that we can control? Where can we make those impact statements? And part of it is that it's hard to realize that you are the leader in the room until you are the one wearing the shirt that says, I am the leader who's here, right? You're like looking for who's the leader here.
Right. Right. Yes. Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. I love it. Y'all connecting the dots. Lovely. Anyone else? I don't want to take up all the time.
Yeah, Annie, and then Emmy.
So I keep thinking, oh yes, thank you for calling on me, Brian. I don't know how to use the things in Zoom.
Me either.
I keep thinking about, we're all talking about leadership as if it's a positive thing. And I've definitely seen a lot of leaders in my academic career that were not affecting change in what I would call a positive way, but we're still affecting change in a way. And so it makes me think a little more broadly, maybe leadership is just the person who's putting their time and energy and raising their voice in the direction that might be different than what you're doing, or even the same that you're doing. But it's, I don't know, I kind of keep coming back to this feeling that it's like the squeaky wheel, right? The person that's willing to invest time and energy, because that's our greatest resource, right? In affecting something. So thinking about maybe what time and resources do I have to affect things.
You got me thinking in the opposite direction, like acknowledging that, there are leaders who are effective in things that we like and leaders who are effective in things that we hate. Hadn't thought of that. It resonates with me when you say the leader is the person who puts in the time and energy. And also that person may or may not be recognized by the group. Does that mean that that person is not a leader? Does a leader have to have followers? Or is it still leadership? Posing that to the group. Do you consider yourself a leader? Oh, sorry, got hands. Either Alexa, let's have Alexa, I guess, first, since Emmy has spoken.
I guess just related to that, the question of like the person who shows up and the person that puts in time. And I have a very low-key leadership role in terms of our student association, but I think sometimes a challenge of being a leader is figuring out how to get input from the people that don't have the time and energy, because often the people, like certainly speaking for the students in my program, the students that need things to change most desperately are also the ones that like are already stretched to the limits by their in-program commitments and out-of-program commitments. And so figuring out how to get their input and their voices, so it's not just like, well, the people who could show up all had a meeting and we all said it was fine. Feels like it can be a challenge sometimes, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. The people that need it the most don't really have that time. Absolutely. Emmy, do you like to go next?
Oh, sure, yeah. Something you said earlier reminded me of something that my friend Brandis said. Some of you might know them from Twitter, probably. It was a few months ago, and they said something like a lot of, math people and like math people in teaching positions in particular seem to do this like waffling all the time, where they say they care, about their students or about making math better or whatever, and then they turn around and like don't do anything about it. And what they said was like, that's not okay. Like you need to either like take a good look at yourself like in the mirror and like be honest with yourself and also the people you claim to care about, that like either you need to do something with that energy or like stop taking up space in like spaces where people do actually want to do that work. Like let other people lead if you're not going to. Yeah, sorry, that really
No,
was
please don't
impactful on me in
apologize.
that.
Yes, yes, much more of that. Absolutely. I am struck by the idea of capitalism. Who said that? Kelly, would you like to say more?
I'm in a coffee shop. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
It's not thought yet. It's just me pondering that perhaps there's like subtler colonialism built into this idea that we really need to be leaders in every situation instead of being more communal. And I'm not suggesting that we shouldn't be leaders. I'm just wondering if that's like the goal, or if it's just one of many goals, and an equally compelling goal is to be a collaborator, maybe to be a supporter, maybe to get out of the way, as someone else was just saying before me, so that someone else can lead. Just questions, I suppose.
Yes, love that, love that. Does a leader have to be, well, is there prestige in leadership? And if there is something that is held prestigious, there is money to be made off of it. There just is. So you're all familiar with Dr. Seuss, the Sneetches, the Star-Billy Sneetches, and they keep like one is the oppressive group and one is the oppressed, and they keep going back and forth. But he's making a killing off of either removing a star or putting on a star. It's all capitalism. Let's see, who is this? Paul. I'm going to read your response, Paul. For me, a leader is a person who informs others' choices, especially in the treatment of others. Assisting someone, changing their vocabulary, because the language can be hard on others. Challenging people who are hurting others. Oh my goodness. Would you like to say more, Paul? You don't have to, just ask.
No. Generally, I'm almost unstoppable, but PK knows this. Only too well. But anyway, yeah. I'm finding it really hard to. I can tell you a very short story. And basically, I've had that done to me recently because I spoke with a group of people who I don't interact with generally, and they have a vocabulary and a vocabulary use that I was unaware of. Words had certain meanings for them, so I had to back off that language. I was quite happy to do that. It's part of my nature. My objective is never to offend. And then recently, I had to put the verbal boot in on somebody over their use of language, which was causing offense to a group of people who all carry Irish passports, but were not born in Ireland. And I'm very happy to see those people here. I've a very wide and diverse group of people that I hang around with. But long story short, the leadership, the word has two meanings, and it flips very quickly. And you've showed it with the thing about the capitalists basically using a position of power, or should we say abusing a position of power. Well, you take your start and moving it back and forth, and then step over into the other side, and it's got the enabling society, our societal change, human change, personal change, whatever. I'm going to stop there because otherwise I'd take up the remaining 4 minutes with very little effort.
Yes, yes. Anyone else? Sorry, I'm trying to speak and juggle comments in the chat at the same time. This is great. Thank you everyone for coming. Seeing a lot of people that I know here. I appreciate that. Oh, heart right back at you.
Thank you for a great talk, Marian. This is a lot of interesting things to think about.
Thank you, Annie.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, so we can hang out for another minute, but just to do our usual wrap up. Oops, I don't know. Does anybody remember from the team what our talk is next week?
Me who hasn't given you an abstract yet.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Asmita, would you like to do the 30-second advertisement for your talk next week?
Yeah, I guess I'm still working on the talk, but it will be kind of an exploration of mathematics and Lewis Carroll, which is something near and dear to my heart that I'm not an expert in, but it's just a thing that makes me really happy.
Excellent. Well, I would like to thank Marian again so much for her time, for coming here and sharing with us and asking some important questions about leadership. And I'd love it if everyone please join me in thanking her one more time for this session.
Thank you so much for having me. It was great.
It was brilliant.
Thank you. This is lovely.